Hello, and you're very welcome to the AA Ireland podcast. I'm Anna Cullen.
And I'm Paddy Common.
Paddy, this episode is one of my favourites because we dive into the world of all things motorsport. We discuss gender in this industry and why there's a lack of female drivers out there on a global scale, but also we explore the future of this sport.
Thinking of renewing or shopping around for car insurance to get the best deal? The AA is one of Ireland's top car insurance intermediaries, and we've been providing car insurance for nearly 40 years. The AA has teamed up with the top insurers to compare quotes so that you can get the best level of cover to suit your needs at the right price. We also do the price checks so you don't have to. To find out more, go to theaa.ie. AA Ireland Limited, trading as AA Insurance, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
So to find out more about this topic, I spoke with motoring journalist Geraldine Herbert and also Nicole Drought, who is a race car driver from County Tipperary. So let's have a listen. So you're very welcome to the AA Ireland podcast, Geraldine.
Thank you, Anna.
Look, some listeners might know and some might not, but can you talk me through the history of race car driving in Ireland and also the role that women have played in this?
Yeah, well, I suppose in terms of motorsport and women, there's even sort of on a global and international sense, there hasn't been that many really that have been involved or stand out. And I suppose, you know, in Ireland, it's been the same. It's been very male dominated. I suppose the ones we'd remember, the main person in Ireland we'd remember is Rosemary Smith, who's still a great icon and has been probably the one person that I'm sure if you interviewed women involved in motorsport today, that would be the name. That would be, you know, the first person they would mention as being the sort of icon. And she's known internationally, and she's not just an Irish hero. But in terms of on a kind of a world scale, on a global scale, I suppose women have been involved in Formula One, which most people don't and are not aware of. They've been involved in rallying. They've been involved in all sorts of areas. But as I said, there's really only a handful of women that I suppose we'd remember.
Yeah, and we'll dive into Rosemary's career a bit more maybe later on. But I do want to stick with the role of women and expand on that and talk about gender in the motorsports industry. So what are your thoughts on this? Like, why are there so few female racing drivers? Is it a lack of opportunity? Is it money or interest?
Yeah, and I think it's as much a lack of opportunities as it is a lack of visibility. It's that age-old thing that we need to get more women involved in the sport to encourage younger women to get, you know, to come through the ranks. But how do you get them there? One of the big things, and I think most women in motorsport would say this, it's a very expensive hobby or pursuit to begin with. So you need sponsorship. Probably companies are more likely to fund males because it's such a male-dominated sport than they are women. So a lack of budget, I'd say, is a big thing, but also role models. But I mean, that is changing. We do see social media has been quite key in all of that. It's much easier now for young women to see other women involved in motorsport, be it on Instagram or be it on Twitter. So I think things are changing for the good in that sense. But, you know, it is a difficult one. There's more things happening in Ireland now. Motorsport Ireland set up a commission for women in motorsport only this year, which seems, you know, slower than most countries, but at least it's happening. There's various initiatives like Formula Female and Girls on Track, and it's all about just, you know, providing these role models for younger women to see that it is possible and to see to almost just consider it as a pathway. For a lot of women, I suppose, you know, if they don't see role models, it's not even on their radar.
And would the reason be physical or the ability of some female drivers? I mean, surely not.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, if we go back to what Sterling Moss said, you know, that they didn't have the mental strength to race hard wheel to wheel. I mean, that to me is just absolutely nonsense. The fact that we do know that the women did compete in Formula One in the 50s, it's nothing to do with that. I just do think it's the environment around it. And as I said, it's seen as a very male dominated world. And not every woman is wants to take on that. And, you know, it is difficult to break into those things, and it's difficult to be the only woman competing or to be the only woman on the circuit. So, you know, I think the more women we get involved, and it is gaining momentum now, we'll see, I think, a big change over the next decade.
So tell us then about some of the historical icons.
Yeah, well, a woman that most people have never even heard of is Maria Theresa de Philippe. She was an Italian who was born in 1926, and she actually competed. She was the first woman to enter a Formula One race championship and was one of only two to have qualified and made it to the starting grid. And I mean, if you ask most people, male or female, name a woman that was involved in Formula One, I don't think it's a name that most people would know. And she started racing when she was 22, and she was basically goaded by her two brothers who said she couldn't drive fast, because she competed in all sorts of sports, but she'd never had any great interest in racing. Anyway, it turned out she was really, really good. And she was winning various different championships and races across Italy in 1954. But she competed in the 1958 and 59 Grand Prix, the 1958 Monaco Grand Prix. And her best achievement was she came 10th in the 1958 Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, but she was later banned from the French Grand Prix the same year when the race director said that the only helmet that a woman should use is the one at the hairdressers. So I think that kind of captures, Anna, what the thoughts were about women competing in Formula One at the time.
Certainly.
Extraordinary. The other thing I find extraordinary about her is, obviously, Formula One had only started in I think it was 1950, so it was all very new. So, the fact that women were competing in 1958 should have meant that in the public mind, Formula One should have been open to males and females. Now, while it wasn't, there was obviously no rules against them competing. It was this perception again that it was a male-dominated sport. But it was another 2 decades before a woman, Leila Lombardi, entered the season in 1974, and she actually finished sixth in her only third race, and that was the best achievement by a woman, the Formula One driver, to this day. And it seems like extraordinary that it was 2 decades, later before that happened. And now look at where we are. We have no women competing in Formula One. So it seems we've gone backwards in that sense.
We have, yeah. And I wanted to talk to you about Formula One, and I wanted to get you just to explain a bit firstly about what it is and why there is such a lack of female drivers. And I also want to touch on the W Series, which is in partnership with Formula One, and it's also going to race at 8 Grand Prix weekends this year. So would you mind just chatting a bit about that? Yeah,
well, I suppose briefly, Formula One is sort of the highest echelons of motorsport, and it's always been male dominated. As I said, if you can count on one hand the amount of women who've actually competed in it, and there's no real reason why women can't compete in it. Yes, it's a very physical sport. Formula One drivers are as much athletes as Olympic competitors, but at the same time, as I said, it's highly, highly competitive. Again, it's like any sort of area of motorsport. You need huge backing, huge sponsorship to get to that level. So the W Series was basically created with the intention of allowing women who cannot get as far as Formula One for all sorts of reasons to actually have a platform to compete at that level. And it was seen, I suppose, it was designed to give women who, as I said, didn't get opportunities, a gateway to move in their career. Now, it's one of those things that there's kind of very differing opinions on it. When it first came out, it was seen as a retrograde step for the simple reason that segregation has never been a part of motorsport. To introduce it, therefore, seemed like it was, it was actually going backwards rather than forwards. But I think since it started, the attitude has changed. And I think one of the interesting things about it is once it started, the whole discussion of gender was removed. We weren't you weren't watching a Formula One race with one single female racer in it and going, oh, isn't she doing great for a woman? Suddenly, because the playing field was level and it was only women competing, I think people who watched it got involved in the driving in the same way as they would, watching the driving in the same way as they would Formula One. And it was no longer, it managed to take gender out of it, which I actually think was a good thing, because I was one of those people who was actually kind of suspect about the W Series and whether or not it was a good idea. So my own view on it now is it's a necessary evil. We hopefully won't have it in the next decade. We'll have moved to a point where we have women competing properly in Formula One. But until then, I think it's a really good idea to allow women get more opportunities, get sponsorship and showcase what they can do.
Absolutely. And Geraldine, I spoke with Nicole Drought, who's from Tipperary. We'll listen to that interview a little later on in the podcast, but she is doing exceptionally well in this sport. She mentioned that when she started off, there weren't many females in the sport. But then as she got older, she said that one of her role models was Rosemary Smith, who you did mention earlier on. Can you talk me through Rosemary's career just a bit more.
Oh yeah, I mean, Rosemary's she's the most fascinating character. I actually interviewed her just before Christmas for an Australian magazine, and that'll just show you there's still huge interest worldwide in Rosemary and her life. I mean, Rosemary, she was born in 1937 in Dublin, and she was one of 3 kids, and it was her father who taught her to drive when she was only 11, but she never had any interest in racing. She was a very kind of self-conscious teenager, and she saw driving as just something to escape. I think she just loved getting into her car and, escaping school and, her own world. It was a way of just getting away from it all. But racing wasn't on the agenda at all. And she actually studied at the Grafton Academy and then set up a boutique with her mum in South Ann Street. And it was actually while running that business that she had a chance meeting with Delphine Bigger, who was the wife of a Monte Carlo rally winner. And she wanted Rosemary to be her navigator at a rally in Killarney. So they went off anyway on this rally, and it turned out very quickly that Rosemary wasn't very good. Her navigating skills weren't particularly good, but she was a great driver. So they swapped roles. Now, they kept the secret for quite a long time. But anyway, to cut a long story short, her driving then began gaining attention, and she was soon offered a position as a works driver for a British manufacturer. And from there, she competed in 6 Monte Carlo rallies, the Geneva Rally, the Circuit of Ireland, all sorts of things. But she's probably best remembered for her victory in the Netherlands in 1965. She won the Tulip Rally. Now, this was after 4 days, 2,000 miles in her famous little trusty Hillman Imp. And that's really the car she became synonymous with. And that's the victory that most people remember her for. And she tells us a great story about returning to the hotel that night. And she had a congratulatory letter and a big bouquet of flowers from Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. So that'll kind of show you just how big, the winning the Tulip Rally was. But I think the event she's most proud of is the 1968 London to Sydney Rally. Now, this was a non-stop marathon covering 11 countries, 17,000 kilometres. And I mean, today, in terms of health and safety, it would never be approved. They drove through the night and all sorts. And she tells a great story about just as she got to the treacherous Khyber Pass in Afghanistan, her Ford Cortina started to develop all sorts of mechanical issues. And anyway, the car wouldn't drive forward, and the only way she could actually cope was to drive in reverse. And she actually drove the entire 73-kilometre stage in reverse. And I think that just tells you what sort of a driver and what sort of persistence Rosemary Smith has. And she has so many stories like that. She really does, of just, and she doesn't even bat an eyelid when she tells them. It's just, well, what else was I going to do? If it wouldn't go forward, it had to go backwards. So, it was as simple as that. And she still has that sort of attitude to life today. But of course, she was then brought to fame and to a whole new audience when in 2017 Renault, she became the oldest woman in the world, the oldest person in the world to drive a Formula One car. This was an anniversary that Renault were celebrating, and Renault Ireland asked her would she be part of it, and she went off and she drove that. Again, what I think is interesting about this, and you wonder how far we've come in terms of attitudes to women. The Guinness Book of Records were actually contacted about this and they were told, there's a 79-year-old woman who's going to drive a Formula One car. Can you come along and verify it, because she's going to be the oldest person in the world? They thought it was so unlikely that she would achieve it. They didn't even bother sending someone to actually verify it. So the world record went unnoticed and unrecorded because of that.
We'll have to get her on. I mean, just to talk about her life. It sounds fascinating, and yeah, just wow.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, honestly, she's amazing. She really is. I'm not doing her any justice. I'm really not.
It's fascinating. Geraldine, just finally, what do you think the future for women in motorsport looks like? Look,
I think the future looks bright. As I said, I think social media has been really key to just showing women, younger women, that there's women at all levels of sport, but there's also women at all levels of the engineering side, the mechanical side. There's women now appearing in all areas of it, which is really, really good. And the more they can be visible role models for younger women, the more opportunities they have. And I really think it makes young women think that this, as I said, these are often opportunities that are possibilities that are not even on their horizon. And the more they can see other women doing things that challenge their perceptions and challenge their own ideas, the more we will see them, becoming a key part in all areas of motorsport. So look, I do think the future is bright.
Well, look, Geraldine, thank you so much for joining us today on the AA Ireland podcast and for your super insight. Now we'll have a listen to my interview with Nicole Drought.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Delighted to be here.
So, look, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Nicole Drought and I'm originally from Roscrea, County Tipperary, probably best known for being involved in motorsport. But outside of that, I am an accountant, but obviously won't get too much into that today because it's not as exciting as the motorsport world.
And, tell me a little bit about your early life. How did you get into this sport?
Yeah, so my dad has a car business in Roscrea, so I was always heavily involved or around cars. And when I was growing up, he used to rally cars, so I followed him around the country and thought that I was the chief inspector of the car during the rallies and keeping an eye on what was going on and questioning everything. So, yeah, I was always involved in his motorsport and just absolutely loved it, and from an early age wanted to compete, and all I wanted was to drive.
So that passion then, growing up, when did that turn serious and when did you become properly involved in the industry?
So a lot of kids would start in karting from about 6 or 7. I was kind of the extreme case where I didn't start until my 20s, so I was very late coming into the sport and had a lot of catching up to do. And I think some of that might have been because I didn't really know the entry points into the sport. Following my dad in rallying, I just wanted to get straight into a rally car when really I probably should have been karting. So I didn't start until 2015, and a couple of years before that I had multiple part-time jobs just trying to raise money to buy my first racing car. So I got to do that in 2015, and that's when it kind of all kicked off for me.
And did you play any other sport? Why did you choose racing? What is the allure in racing?
Yeah, I loved all different types of sports. I played camogie and I loved tennis and football and playing with loads of cousins, so we used to play all sorts of games. And I was a very sporty child, but I don't know what it was about motorsport, but it kind of drew me a little bit more, and I think that cut out the rest of the sports once I got into a racing car. So I think it must be the adrenaline rush. I don't think I get anything else. I don't get that same rush from any other sport or any other thing. It's hard to describe. It's a feeling that's just like no other.
And when you're racing then, is it, describe that feeling that you get? I mean, you're travelling at speeds that I can't even imagine travelling at. Yeah,
I mean, it's when you think back, it's probably madness, but at the time, you're so focused and you want to win that you're not thinking about the danger of the sport. It's just, I can't even describe the feeling. You can feel it in your tummy. It's just incredible, and I enjoy every second of being in a racing car and driving it to the limit.
So look, Nicole, talk to me through the steps from 2015 in your career from then to now.
Yeah, so in 2015 I started out in Irish touring cars, which was the championship that my dad was competing at the time. So it was the natural kind of step for me because I didn't really know about any of the other classes. And I did that for 2 years and became the first woman to win in the championship. I then moved on to globals. I kind of dipped my foot into many different cars after that to just gain as much experience as possible. Strikers, did the 6-hour Fiesta race here. Yeah, there's just so I'm trying to think back of all the different championships I've dipped into now, and then into brick car in the Porsche, Hyundai TCR in brick car, and this year in the Lotus. So I'm probably after taking out a big chunk of cars that I'm after driving, but that's just from memory where the different cars that I've driven since I started.
And when you were growing up, you looked up to your dad, but want to talk about females as well in the industry. Did you have any role models growing up, or were you aware that there were, a lack of females, so to speak?
It's strange because it took a number of years for me to realise that I actually didn't really know any females involved in the sport. I think because I was so involved in it from an early age, I didn't kind of notice if there was male or females, and just when I think back now, it was all males. But I was never made to feel any different, or that I was strange for being a girl in love in motorsport. I think my family made me just feel like it was the norm. But yeah, it's not until later years that I kind of realised that look, there aren't that many females in the sport. And even when I bought my first racing car and brought it to Mandela Park, that was when I stood out a little bit because there weren't that many females driving racing cars. But absolutely, the number one person I can think of is Rosemary Smith, who's an icon, not just in Irish motorsport but around the world, and she definitely paved the way for females in motorsport. So she's definitely someone that I look up to, bar my father as well.
Of course. And let's talk about then the process of getting into it. If I was a young girl and if I was listening to the podcast and this is something I wanted to do, Can you talk me through the process? Because I know it's quite expensive. You mentioned buying your first race car as well. Can you talk me through those steps?
Yeah, so motorsport is a really expensive sport. I mean, not just the cart or the car, but all your gear and your helmet and everything else. So I think the first thing I would do if I was a young kid looking to get into racing is talk to someone who's done it. I guess the starting point is to maybe try rental carts to see if you like it, first of all, before spending all that money. And then after that, depending on your age, and maybe karting is the best route because you can't start in cars until you're 14. But definitely ask someone. That's one mistake I probably made, is not asking the question of where I should start. So if anyone that is listening and has questions, please feel free to reach out to me and ask. And
the physical aspect of this sport, how often do you train?
Yeah, I think a lot of people laugh when you bring up fitness in motorsport because you're just driving a car, so why would you need to be
fit?
You're
sitting down.
But actually it is very physically draining and mentally draining as well. So I would try do 3 or 4 gym sessions and maybe a couple of cardio sessions as well during the week. And I've noticed a massive difference in myself and how I approach racing and how I'm able to do longer stints in the car. So I could do 1-hour races up to 24-hour races. So you need to have that stamina to be able to last that long in a racing car and have that focus for that length of time. And also the mental side of it, I work with Alan Heary, who was my performance coach. So we would do a lot of visualisation and keep myself calm for the race and focus. So, there's a huge element outside of just jumping into a racing car to be ready to race.
And do you think there is some sort of, I won't say bias towards men with the physical side of things? Do you think that matters?
I don't think it's affected me so far. I mean, as I mentioned, when I started out, I probably wasn't as fit as I am now. And I notice a huge difference in myself when I get into the car. So you definitely need to have an element of fitness, I think, to be competitive. But so far as being as strong as a male, I mean, I haven't seen that affect me yet anyways. And like, to be honest, I've only really competed against males. I would say there were probably only a handful of females that I've competed against since 2015. So, yeah, I don't think there has been.
What races or series can you tell me about? What have you been in and what cars have you driven?
Yeah, I've driven a lot of cars and I've been in a couple of different series. I mean, the most notable cars, are probably the 2 Formula 1 cars that I got to drive, thanks to John Campion. He signed me up in 2020 to be a CJJ Motorsports driver. John was originally from Cork and was supporting young Irish drivers. And he allowed me to drive the March Guinness Formula 1 car here at Mondello Park. So that was absolutely incredible at the Historic Festival. And the next car, I suppose, in Florida in 2020 again, I got to drive his Jordan Formula 1 car. So they're probably the most notable cars, or the cars that people can relate to. Outside of that, I got to drive in Brick Car in a Porsche GT4 car. So some really cool pieces of machinery.
That's amazing. And what are you up to now?
This year I'm competing in the Club Enduro in a Lotus Elise, something very different for me, working with downforce this time. So there's a lot to learn in that, but I'm absolutely having a ball so far. We just had our first race, but unfortunately it didn't go to plan. We had some gearbox and engine troubles, but at the end of May we'll hopefully be out again and fighting for podiums.
And winning and losing, obviously winning is great, but how do you handle losing and, disappointment?
I think when you're depending on a car, it's kind of difficult because you're relying on external factors as well as yourself, and that can be quite tough. I mean, it can get to you mentally when things go wrong, or even if you make a mistake yourself, it's really hard to accept. But working with Alan, he's really helped me to try deal with these kind of things and reset for the next race, and take notes of what could go better next time, what could I do to improve, what could we do to have a better car for the next weekend. So while they're really tough, and I've had some tough weekends where you question yourself, but I think all sports people do, it's only natural because you want to be the best. So it is tough, but I do have things in place there and people I work with to help me deal with those things.
And I suppose losing as well, if you don't lose you can't improve, and it makes winning all the better, doesn't it?
Definitely. I mean, you can't really learn so much by coming last, by winning. You can't learn too much by winning, but if you come last, at least you can kind of see what factors made you finish in last place and how can you improve for the next one. I mean, you don't see the winner on the podium sitting down looking through his data, seeing how he can go better. The bad days make the the good days really, really good, because you really, really appreciate
really special.
it.
Yeah. I want to talk about the cost and how expensive motorsport is and how important sponsorship is as well.
Yeah, I mean, sponsorship is key. When I started out myself, I was trying to pay for it myself, and obviously got to a point where it was getting too much, and I wanted to keep it going because I was going well. But sponsorship at the moment is absolutely key for me to stay going. So yeah, I have a couple of loyal sponsors, and I'm very grateful to them because they've kept me going over the last couple of years. And
are you always open to more sponsorship?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if anyone wants to get in contact, I know people are probably afraid in case you're going to stay hounding them, but if you want to get in contact and find out what's involved, or if you want to let me know what you would like for your business in return, absolutely do get in contact. You can get in contact on Nicole.ie. There's a contact form there if you want more information.
Perfect. And are you on social media?
I am, yeah. I'm on at Nicole Drought Racing, so on all platforms: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook.
You name it. And finally, Nicole, what are your plans for the future?
My long-term plan is to get to Le Mans or Daytona 24-hour. It's a bit of a long shot, I think, but I didn't think I'd get to drive 2 Formula 1 cars when I started out. So yeah, it's definitely something that I'm trying to work towards and keep getting experience, and hopefully someday I'll get to do it.
Well, look, you mentioned your role models, but I think you're definitely one to look up to for younger people anyway. So thanks a million for joining us today on the AA Ireland podcast.
Thank you so much.
If you'd like to read or listen to more of our content, go to the AA blog, www.theaa.ie/blog. And you will of course find us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook and TikTok.
Please subscribe to the podcast, and until next time, goodbye and be safe.